Hello and welcome. Former Beatle George Harrison had an extraordinary and varied career beyond his wonderful years with the Fab Four touring the world and playing in front of millions of fans. George also had a passion for movies, and he went on to become executive producer of hits like Monty Python's Life of Brian, Time Bandits, Withnail and I, and Mona Lisa, as well as some controversial films like Madonna's Shanghai Surprise. And he discovered a whole other world making movies, including confrontations with the New York Teamsters Union and Hong Kong Triads, who, at various times, tried to blackmail producers to halt the making of particular films. In this audio interview, not long after Shanghai Surprise was released, George also talked about the story behind the making of The Life of Brian, the millions of dollars ripped off from the Beatles, his musical inspirations, and working with movie star egos. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe your first movie experience was Bambi at the age of...
Yeah, somebody just asked me what I remembered as the first film I can remember seeing, and that's all I can remember. Must have been about 5.
In the forest.
We were talking about those big Art Deco cinemas they used to have, you know, and that's the earliest film I can remember.
Do you remember going to the movies regularly, or was it something that was a very special treat?
Well, it was a special treat. I live quite near a really good cinema in Liverpool, but I can't really remember many films there, really. But I remember more than anything just the feel of the cinema, you know, those big nice curtains and the lights and all this. Like they used to have these goldfish in the foyer and stuff.
Because it really was quite an experience in those days,
wasn't it? And a lot of them cinemas now are just made into these, 4 or 5 small places built into the one building.
That's right. Well, in Australia, they've got, I think, 4 or 5 cinemas in both Sydney and Melbourne.
And also used to see 2 films as well. They used to always have, like, they'd have the adverts on, and then they'd have a news feature, and then they'd have a cartoon, or they'd have a B movie, they call it a B movie, and then they'd have the cartoon or something, and an intermission, then have the A movie. So, I mean, you know, for your shilling or whatever
exactly,
to go in there, you saw like
was
4 hours of
you really got your money's worth.
Yeah.
I go back that far and sort of ask you about those memories, because really there's no connection between you and movies until really you started making, you know, Hard Day's Night and so on.
Yeah, well, Hard Day's Night, I suppose, is the first proper connection, the movies, and the Beatles made, you know, Help, and then we made that sort of more like a TV film, the Magical Mystery Tour.
Right. Sergeant Pepper's.
And there wasn't a film.
There was an animated.
Oh, there was the Yellow Submarine. Yeah.
Yellow Submarine.
Yeah. But later than that, I can't remember quite which year it was. I think it was around 1970. I made a film called the
Magic Christian.
No, Ringo was in Magic Christian.
Oh, that's right, of course.
Yeah, he had a part in that. But I produced a film called Little Malcolm and his struggle against the eunuchs.
With John Hurt.
John Hurt, David Warner, and John McInnery.
McInnery, that's right.
And although that film at that time, we didn't have any distribution, it came out in a couple of cinemas, one in New York, one in London, just for... It was not that easy to get it put out. But I mean, they're all stars now.
Of course, Hurt in particular.
It's still, that film had some great moments to it. It's a pity it ended very violently. But the stage, it was originally a stage play, which I saw John Hurt in. And then a year or 2 later, I met him. And I became a good friend of his. And that film resulted because he was always complaining about the movies he was making, saying, oh, it was really good, but they edited it and reshot, put Haley Mills in it or whatever, you know. So I said, well, why don't you try, and if we could try and put this together where you choose the people who are in it, and it's got some, in the stage play, it went on for a long time, and it was all set, you know, in one situation. So the film, it had difficulty to try and open it up and try and get all the story in to like a 90-minute So I was involved with some other films, like more to do with music, like The Concert for Bangladesh.
Yes, of course.
And I got involved editing with that film, which I enjoyed a lot. I spent a couple of months in an editing room in New York. And I was involved with another film, which I think Apple had something to do with it. I got Apple to give some money to get it finished, which was a documentary about Ravi Shankar's life, a film called Raga.
I remember that.
And,
I didn't see it, but I do remember it.
So it's sort of been around a bit.
So what about in the days of making Help and A Hard Day's Night? Did you guys have, and you particularly, given what's happening now to you, did you have any creative say in the script, in what happened in the day-to-day shooting with Dick Lester and so on?
In the script, the first film, Hard Day's Night, was it was very strange, really, because it was a great opportunity. Obviously, we all wanted to make a film, and we were approached by Walter Shenson, the producer, and he got somebody, got a guy, Alan Owen, because he was a playwright from around Liverpool, and he just came on tour for about 3 days with us, and then went and wrote that film. And as it happens, it's just really about, it's a zany version of what was really going on, just with lots of songs and stuff. But there were certain things about it which didn't seem right, and we changed a bit of dialogue and we improvised, like, say, for instance, the press conference scene. We all sort of made up our own lines to say, but we didn't have a great deal of input in the script at all. Although Dick Lester was so great to work with. I mean, he was, and I appreciate him more since, over the years, because I realised how kind he was to us, because he had to put up with a lot, because we were crackers.
I was going to say, you must have been a real lively lad.
And he was very, very good, and he was, if we had any ideas at all, we'd say, "Hey Dick, what about doing such and such?" And he'd just say, "Yeah, okay, let's try." And a lot of things, particularly in Help, because we'd grown up a little bit by that time. That was probably only a year later, but the growth rate was rapid in those days. And I think we all enjoyed that film more because we'd had the success of Hard Day's Night. We felt a bit more confident, and also because it was in colour. I don't know, for some reason it seemed like I think it was a larger budget, and we went on all those locations. It was very enjoyable, actually, except for waiting around. I think it's the most boring job in the world, being in a movie.
2 minutes of shooting a day, but you have to be on the set, sort of thing.
Yeah, you could be there 7 a.m. and we go there and get all your hair done and your makeup on and your suit on, and then sit there till lunchtime.
Looking back now, and obviously you assess a lot of scripts. I mean, are you able to go back and draw on those experiences to make judgments today, or is all of that just past and history?
Well, I don't think I consciously use any of that, but I think in life, any experiences you go through, it all goes into the computer somehow and has some sort of bearing on your thoughts and ideas, and I think at least I know what it's like being both sides of a camera, and I appreciate the tedium of a film and how difficult it is to keep the energy flowing when you're waiting around for hours and hours. And I like to to think that I'm sort of try to be flexible with the artistic side of a film, because now I'm in this peculiar position of being what the artists call the money, and
the front office,
and they sort of is that the Aussie version, and they there's been a historical dislike of money people. We went through that ourselves with the records and stuff. What do they know? We're the artists, we're the creative people. And it's just funny being on the other side of that. And I like to try and, I think most of the producers and directors and actors that we've worked with, they realise that, we're trying to be a little bit more than just the financiers of a film. And
Is anybody
and
right?
especially with Ray, you know, I think Ray helps a great deal in that department because he's a musician too, and he's a very, he's got great taste and great integrity, and he can get on well with all those different departments, you know, from casting to editing, and even ends up doing the advertising, the posters, and you know, and dealing with the musicians, or even playing on the score, a lot of the things.
I mean, is it fair ever to say that one side is right and the other isn't? The money's right and the creative
No, I think in life everything's a balance, and I'll give you a good example of that. We made a film with Terry Gilliam after we'd done the Life of Brian, the Python film. Terry, as you know, is the American one of the Monty Pythons now. He came up with that great idea for a film which was the Time Bandits. Now, we were just talking about that film, and I don't think it got shown. I think it's out here on video, and I don't know if it was
It
very
did have a brief
successful.
run here, not terribly.
But that film was enormously successful in America and Europe, and it did very well. And Terry, during the course of making the film, was you know, you always run into problems where one person thinks, well, it's too long and that scene's dragging and we've got to cut it down and do something, and we'd have these meetings, and, you know, Terry would be shouting, and, you know, we'd all argue, and by the end of that film, Terry and my partner in the film business, who's the business side,
Denis O'Brien.
Denis, they had a sort of arguments and sort of ending up not being that friendly with each other. They're okay now, but, you know, then Terry went off and had this chance and made Brazil, which took 3 years of his life. He was dealing with all the Hollywood moguls who gave him the hardest time that he's ever had. And he said to me a couple of months ago, he says, I tell you why, when I think about Time Bandits, it was the happiest, nicest little film, you know, and, you know, so you have to have a balance. I think he realizes that if anybody's going to put up $10 million, $20 million, they want to have some say in the finished product, because, you know, Terry is brilliant, Gilliam, but you can't, you know, there's too much at stake for one person's whim to just let it go like that. So, I mean, Terry's got a new movie project he's working on, which I would love HandMade Films to make, but I don't think we could afford to give him £20 million and just walk away and let him, you know, brilliant as he is. Excuse us. As brilliant as he is, you know, just to let him have the final, total edit to himself. Although I think we're flexible enough to be able to put in a bit of input and say, you know, it's the same with this film Mona Lisa. I mean, Neil Jordan, he had 3 different endings. And one ending that he preferred was such a downer that we sort of pushed it a bit to get the ending that's on the film now, and at least it ends with a bit of hope, and you walk out of the cinema thinking, oh well, good, at least the hero he's okay and there's some future for him. But the way it was with Terry's version, with Neil Jordan's version, it was so depressing.
We'll come back and talk about that.
You have to have a bit of balance. I think there's a give and take from both sides.
The one of the connections, I believe, with you and Denis, and then into the film industry, was through Peter Sellers back in about 72, 73. That Peter, I think, I've got it right, introduced you to Denis.
Not quite like that. It's something like that. But Peter, I knew Peter sort of off and on, we met occasionally, and I didn't know Denis, but Denis became Peter's business manager, because there was some friend of Peter's who knew Denis and asked if he'd help him out because he was in a mess. And I also knew Peter, got to friendly with Peter in the 60s, around the time of Alice B. Toklas, because Peter was very into India and Indian music, and I was, of course, with Ravi Shankar doing, like I said, that movie Raga, and also spending a lot of time with Ravi in India, and you know, producing records with him and trying to learn the sitar. And so Peter and Ravi and I used to, I mean, that's quite a strange combination of
certainly
people.
is.
I mean, the funniest thing was we once went to Disneyland together. Can you imagine? Peter Sellers, me and Ravi Shankar on the pirate ride. And so...
were you recognised though?
I think so. But we had, through that period, then Denis started managing Peter. And I think I've forgotten what your question was.
Oh,
that's right. And there was a friend of mine who was one of the Hare Krishnas who had met Peter Sellers. And Peter introduced Denis to this Krishna guy for some reason, obscure reason. And this Krishna guy at that time was when Apple and the Beatles, at least the three of us, not Paul, were managed by a notorious person called Alan Klein from New York, and we just got rid of him out of our business lives, and everybody, it was like rats leaving a ship, and everybody was scrambling to pick up their own pieces, and I didn't have any lawyer or any manager or anything like that, and this friend of mine who was in the Krishnas, he knew I was in a bit of a state, and he'd met Denis O'Brien and said, he set up this meeting saying, there's this guy who's a businessman and he wants to meet you, and then he told me, he told Denis that I wanted to meet him, and he set up this meeting where Denis came and hung around Los Angeles where I was for a few days, and then I met him and he gave me his card and we talked, and then I met him a few months later. I thought, God, I've got to get somebody to organise me.
It was really hard, obviously, at that point
for you.
It was
dreadful. I mean, all our money that we ever made from Beatles records and from Beatle films, or any source, it all came into this company, Apple, which had been pilfered by all these famous gangsters. And it was a mess, and Paul was suing us three because we had this guy managing us, and it was just a mess. And I had my own song publishing, was in New York, which was an illegal company, because this guy had set me in New York, and it meant that I either was breaching some company laws, or if I didn't own the company, he owned all my copyrights. And I was in a mess. And so when Denis came along, it was like, it enabled me to breathe again, and he salvaged all the pieces that he could and organized me, and he's been my business manager since then, since 1973, I think it was. And that leads us up into 1978, when Eric Idle and was a sort of hanging out a lot with Eric, and we got to a point where they were, I spent a lot of time with Eric and with Michael Palin, and that was the time I knew they were off in the Bahamas, Barbados, writing this script, and Eric kept telling me this story of a fellow who called Brian. And, I was looking forward to this film, and then suddenly I found out the money had been withdrawn. They were into pre-production, and then the great organisation, the ATV or whatever, they backed out of the deal. And so this other mutual friend of mine said, can you think of a way of how to help them get their film made? And I thought, God, it's such a shame. I was, looking forward to seeing this. So I went to Denis and told him what had happened, and he came back to me a week later. He said, I think I've figured out how to do it. We'll produce it. And he came up with some wacky idea of how we'd pawned all our companies and buildings and stuff and raised the money from the bank, and we became the producers.
Because of course the public would have thought that you had so much money that you just sort of take the checkbook out and write a check, and here's $10 million. It wasn't like that.
It's not like that at all, because it's true, the Beatles' earnings was enormous, but in those days our royalty rates were so low because we were all naive, and we all didn't. We were just lucky to make a record at that time, and we got like a penny for every record. which went on for years, and even to this day we've got an enormous legal battle with Capitol Records and EMI, who, there's like millions and millions of Beatle albums missing that no royalties were ever paid, and it's just it's covered full of skeletons, and
that still goes on now.
That right to this day we've got a lawsuit against Capitol now, and we audited them, and there's like $30 million missing that was never paid, and it's ridiculous, So we've had enough of that, and now it's, we've tried to negotiate with them for years, and they won't do that. And so it's coming to a head now, but there was a lot of things, like for instance there's a Beatlemania. This is a wonderful story because a lot of things never worked out for the Beatles. Although we had this great earning power, we made a lot of money, but we got some of the money, but a lot of it was really just disappeared. And then again we had that fiasco where Apple just, with no management, it just was drained, and we weren't having the money direct to ourselves, it was going in this company. But there was this show called Beatlemania, which just took all of the ideas of the Beatles and had people pretending to be us doing all our tunes. And we sued them years ago, and it finally came to court. And this company that made the show Beatlemania had an insurance company against any claims. And the lawyers worked out a deal with them saying, we'll settle out of court for $1 million, and the insurance company said, we're not giving them any money, let it go to court. Went to court, the judge awarded us $11 million. But I mean, that's a great story, but I mean the typical thing that happens is that they'll probably appeal it, and it'll go on another 4 years, and by the time then the judge will probably give us $4 million. And then the lawyers' fees will probably be $4.5 million. So there was a lot of money earned, and I'm certainly not saying that we're broke, but it was never like that, where you could just shovel 10 million into a film, because also we were paying 19 shillings in a pound. I mean, remember the famous song Taxman? That we were paying, top whack for forever, really. And so it wasn't as easy as, and also when you've spent 20 years trying to save and put away some money to make sure you're going to be all right for the future, the last thing you're going to do is just blow it all in one movie, which you could quite easily. So
you were really, it was a borrowing exercise.
So we borrowed the money, put up the office building, and or whatever. It was just like you would pawn your thing,
a house to buy a car, or whatever.
Yeah, mortgage, the sort of situation.
But it worked out for you. And
it did work. It worked out in the end. It worked out. We paid off the bank loan, and even ended up with some which we then put into the next film, Time Bandits, and it's just kept going like that now. And it's got slightly more serious because the more product, I hate that word product, but that's what they call it. But the more we have, the more people have taken us serious, and then the more independent distributors have cropped up, and people will now talk to us because we've had a bit of success. But at the same time, we're trying to keep it, it's expanded a little bit, HandMade Films, but just trying to keep it tidy and not too extravagant. And now all our films have been made that way, with no
smaller budget films. You mean?
We've made we've made a couple of films which were slightly expensive, like this film Water with Michael Caine, and this Shanghai Surprise was ridiculously expensive because when you ship a whole film crew out and put them in hotels in Hong Kong and pay off the Triads to let you go to work, it's sort of...
You had to do that?
Even now in New York we were making a film and we had to pay $700,000 to the Teamsters union, which we all know is run by the mafia. Otherwise they wouldn't let them have any trucks there, It's pathetic what's going on.
Even then, your company had to pay $700,000.
The budget of the movie, part of that is 700,000.
For which movie was that?
This is called Five Corners. It's
Oh, right.
just still being shot at the moment.
That's with
Jodie Foster
right.
and a couple of there's a lot of new people that I'm not that familiar with.
Tim Robbins,
Yeah.
Todd Graff, and John Turturro,
That's right.
and directed by Tony Bill.
Yeah.
And you've had to pay $700,000 to.
Now,
what about-
I mean, I don't know if I'm supposed to say things like that, actually. But I mean, that's the truth. That's what it is.
Well, the Paul Hogan told me that when they were making Crocodile Dundee in New York, they had a similar situation where they, it was either we get the trucks.
Well, that's it. The Teamsters run everything over there. And,
What about with Shanghai Surprise then? I mean, was that as serious as in New York? I mean, were you in...
It's serious when you've got a crew of all these people, hundreds of people are involved in trucks and generators and lights and cameras and stuff, and you trying to get to the location and you've got a roadblock with the Chinese sort of gangsters. It's, it's a sort of common thing. You have to pay them.
This is what happened?
Yeah, it happens all the time,
What, they deliberately put up a roadblock to stop
I mean,
the crew getting through?
then they try and stop them getting out, And
What happened?
there's just people, film companies always have people who have to run around negotiating and paying people off. Because it's like a ransom, Because that's where it's like a taxi. If you imagine a taxi with an enormous clock ticking up the money, once you put a film in motion, that's it, and it's easy to run up $100,000 just without, while people are just looking sideways.
Yeah. No, I've worked on a couple of films. I know the kind of problems that
So you've got to have absolute tight control, and we've tried to go on the basis that, well, if we absolutely need something in a movie, well, we'll do it, but we're not having everybody lolling around in champagne and Cadillacs or whatever, limousines.
Is that one of the reasons why you haven't really made any effort to sort of establish a HandMade Films in America, and you're doing it all out of Britain?
Well, it's partly because that's where our base is, but we do have a small office in the States, and this is the first film, Five Corners, as I say, that is actually an American film, because it's an American cast and script and crew. And there's another film to be made in January in Louisiana, which is called Catfish Tangle, which will be an American film too.
Who's in that one?
At the moment, Mickey Rourke.
Oh, right.
But I'm not too sure at this stage what's going to happen because of the problem we had with Sean Penn. Occasionally you get people who are so talented that they want to edit the film and they want to rewrite the script and they want to do everything themselves, and as I say, when you've got all these people involved, you can't afford to let one person screw you around like that, and so I don't know if how it's going to work out and who will actually end up in the film in the end. But
Who's likely to direct it?
there's a French guy. I'll have to look it up on here because this is one film that came along very recently and is because normally these films take years to get to the point. Actually, I don't think I have any information on it at the moment. I can get all the information you need from the the CEL.
Look, I keep in touch with Guy Scott anyway. So
Yeah,
I'm
so
sure
he
he'll be
can
able
give
to
you
tell
all
me.
that information. But it came out of the Cannes Film Festival. Somebody there that
had a
came to
script.
HandMade with the script, and they took the script back, and everybody read it and just thought it was fantastic, and whoosh, it went into pre-production.
We talked a little bit about Shanghai Surprise, and you mentioned Sean Penn. I mean, what were the real? There was so much sort of
Just what you
rubbish and headlines that we read about.
Well,
What was the fact?
you can take the headline and the sensational stuff with a pinch of salt. There was truth in it, obviously, and you know, you can read it in any paper, or you know, about how Sean, he's just, I would say, a bit like McEnroe. He just, you know, he's really a very nice person at times, and then he just, for some reason, the slightest thing gets him angry, and you know, he likes to brawl. It's unfortunate, really. I think he may grow out of it. If he does, he can end up being really a good actor and you know, quite popular, but the way it is at the moment, you know, it spoils him, because you know, you don't know where you are with him, and we had a lot of hold-ups on the film because of his temperament, and then the press obviously pick up on that, and they love that. It was like winding him up and sticking, you know, knives in him, and then he'd read the paper, and I would say to him, look, you can't read the papers, and you know, if you're gonna get angry about it, just don't read them, or don't do it. And you know, then he'd get really uptight, and then he'd get moody and say, I'm not shooting today, you know, until somebody sues the Daily Express or something like that, you know. It just was a headache, and out of all the films we've made, you know, we've never really had problems at all. Like, the worst thing that's ever happened is, say, you know, just a discussion or an argument about how the final edit should be, but you know, this one film being involved with people from Hollywood, it just gave us more trouble than it was worth.
What about Madonna? Was she quite easy by comparison?
She, yes, she was, you know, she was quite willing to just go and try to do her part. And, but then again, because they're together all the time, that she was so influenced by him, like if he said, hey, you know, we shouldn't do this, then, you know, she wouldn't do it either. But
did you actually have to fly out to Macau to resolve things?
I went out to Hong Kong. I was always going to go out there anyway, because I needed to familiarise myself with everything, because I was committed myself months and months before to doing the music. So I had to be there. I wanted to see what was happening and how the film was looking, and to get a feel of China. China was Hong Kong, but we were outside in the new provinces as well. And also because I wanted to get some Chinese sounds for the music, which I did in the studio in Hong Kong. It just coincided really with that Macau incident, which was reported in the press.
Which one was that?
Where he punched out some photographer.
All right.
And sort of silly, really.
Well, you weren't there though when that happened, or were you?
No, I wasn't there. But the press did tend to exaggerate a lot, or even if it wasn't an exaggeration, they tended to go on and on and on about it, and like rubbing salt into a wound. Because I think Sean himself even, you know, I mean, he sort of regrets things the next day, and, you know, the last thing you need is somebody to keep harping on about it. And my main concern was just to try and make him and Madonna just try and relax and forget all that stuff and just get on with the job. And
is the film what you hoped it would be?
It's I think the film in many ways could have been far better if we'd have had a much more of a harmonious situation going on. And you know, I think some of the scenes that were created with the press and with their attitude reflect in the film. The one thing that is, I think, could have been much betterly done was the humour of it, because the film is a bit tongue-in-cheek, you know, it's not a very serious film, and I think the comedy side of it that's what I expected it to be, much more comical than it turned out. It's sort of still amusing, and it's I think a lot of people will walk away from it thinking, well, it's not the greatest film, but it's sort of interesting, and I think they may want to just see, and form their own opinion on it.
Well, I did an interview with Sean Penn in LA, which was, again, quite an interesting experience. At the end, I asked him, it had been all about at close range, and at the end I said to him, do you mind, because I'm obviously not going to get a chance to talk to you again when Shanghai Surprise comes out, can I just talk to you briefly about that? And he said, I've got nothing to say. And I said, well, I'm not interested in the personal side of it. I've worked on a film in Macau myself, which I had, and I was just curious to sort of get some anecdotes about the shooting. He said, as far as we're concerned, the film wasn't made.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you see his attitude. And that attitude was the thing that destroyed, the possibility of it being a really enjoyable movie.
Mm. On the other hand, though, Mona Lisa,
you see, is a different kettle of fish. You've got basically something which is more about the human element of that character. Bob Hoskins, I think, is just such a great actor. I mean, he's able to come across on the screen. Not only does he act very, very well, but he has that, whatever that extra little thing is, that he's so believable in his part. And I think, Kathy Tyson's good for her first film. She's, you couldn't expect anybody to do a better performance, really, for what was required. And I think also because of Bob Hoskins' power as an actor, he brought the best out of Michael Caine. Although he's got a small part, Michael Caine is very, very good. He's quite scary character, really. You've got that guy Roger Pratt, who I think gave a hell of a lot to the film. He's the lighting cameraman.
Yes, it's very well shot, actually.
Yeah, it's very nice to look at. And of course, Neil Jordan is a talent, and I think he's gonna, it's gonna be a lot of good Neil Jordan films in the future. I think, it shows.
Because you were associated with Bob, particularly on, the result of The Long Good Friday,
Yeah.
but you didn't make that film,
We didn't make that. That, again, was As the Life of Brian. It was owned and made by the company that turned down The Life of Brian. And I think the reasons for that was because, do you know Long Good Friday?
Mm.
It's has a sort of IRA connotation to it. And this is the story I heard anyways, that they didn't like this fact that maybe it was a bit touchy, this IRA. And I think this is what happens when people, become part of the establishment and are knighted and stuff. They start wondering about whether they themselves are going to look good, or if something in the storyline is going to reflect on their own knighthood or something like that. I don't know, but they decided they were going to chop the film up and put it on television, and the cast and the director and producers of that film, they were horrified, and all they wanted was to have a theatrical release, and so the film lay around for ages, and all kinds of people were talking about this film, and eventually we just went and bought it. And they were the happiest people because it came out just like they wanted. They wrote me a real nice letter saying, it was always our desire to see a theatrical release of this film, and thank you very much. So, I mean, in a way, we became the sort of heroes by doing that. But it was a great film, and it was very, very British, and, again, Bob Hoskins, the power of him in that film is fantastic.
Was it your idea to cast him in Mona Lisa,
No.
or purely Neil's?
Neil Jordan was, I think he had Bob Hoskins in mind when he wrote the screenplay.
Because I think it's a wonderful film.
Yeah.
I was at Cannes, and
Yeah.
I'll never forget racing. I was asked to do a story for the BBC News that night that all the awards were named, because I was there working for the Hollywood Reporter, which had a TV show every day, and they needed somebody very quickly who could get a story and get it on the satellite over.
Yeah.
And I'd seen Bob a couple of days beforehand, done an interview with him, and he'd gone back to London, and I was sort of racing with this cameraman, scrambling over the back of the area out the back of the Palais there, and finally caught up with Bob, and the sweat was pouring off him because he was really chuffed. And I said, "Bob, how do you feel?" "Well," he said, "I was sitting in my we were mowing the lawn or something in his backyard, and got a call to jump on a plane."
It's the nice thing about him, though. You see, he's so pleased that people actually like him and that he's become so popular, and he's just so unaffected. It's wonderful, really. And he, even things like saying, "Oh," and they say, "How am I going to get to Cannes by 7 o'clock?" And they said, "Well, we've got a jet for you." I said, "Well, just the idea of getting on a private jet and flying there, and I love that. I think the more people who, that's when success is very, very nice, when the people deserve it and they're very happy to be able to receive, that sort of flattery. But when other people who just think they're such big shots that they rule everywhere, because we went through that, I think that was one of the good qualities of the Beatles. We had such fame and glory, and yet we always managed to keep a sense of humour and to try and be nice to people. And it doesn't cost you anything to do that.
I think you certainly did retain that. Do you have, looking back, and apart from the financial situations that confronted you, do you have any regrets about all those years?
No, it was great. You can always look at anything in retrospect and say, if only we did this, and if only, you could say, if we'd have known we were going to be so famous, we would have made EMI give us, $3 every record. And, or we could have done all this. We would have merchandised all that stuff, that merchandise, the Beatle wigs and Beatle this, that, you can think of all those things, what we should have done or whatever. But we were very lucky that so much goodness came out of that, with us being, when we started, we were just, all we wanted to do was write a few tunes and make a record. And, we were thrust into this big world of business and everybody, the lawyers and all this. And even now, all I want to do is just make a record or write a tune, plant a tree or make a movie. And I don't want to know about all the greediness and the hustling and the cheating and all that goes on in life. So I don't have any regrets, because I think with all your experiences, the bad ones too, it helps you to grow. And I think we're all pretty sound in our minds, and I'm thankful for that.
Do you keep in contact with Paul and Ringo?
Yeah, I've seen them both a lot, and they're well. And I think with our age as well, we're mellowed out. There was a period of time when Paul and I didn't get on very well, but we're great friends now. And I think time slips away, and we realise that it sort of comes back around the cycle. I met Paul when I was 13 years old or 12 years old, at school. And so there's much more fun and good experiences that we've shared than the bad ones.
Is there ever any chance that you might come back and do a record together in some form? I mean, everybody would like it, obviously.
Well, that's the first stage, sort of seems to have happened, in as much as Paul and I are good friends now. The next stage is if we can pick up a couple of guitars and sing a few old Buddy Holly tunes together. Who knows, we may be able to knock out a tune or two. And if we can get that far, then, what's to stop us getting in a studio together for one reason or another? But it would never be anything like some great big reunion album or concert. I think we would pass that stage. We're just thankful to be able to be friendly, and if we can actually produce a tune or something, that's a nice little song, that would be enough.
Why the ghost of Buddy Holly? Why would he have?
Well, it's just that when we were kids, when we got our guitars, we were into all those early Elvis, Buddy Holly, Everly Brothers, and I mean that's the kind of thing that if we were together in a room and picked up a guitar, we're more likely to sing Peggy Sue than we are to sing Yesterday.
What is Peggy Sue your favourite Buddy Holly song?
No, but it's just a good one to play on the guitar.
Well, what is your favourite Buddy Holly? I mean, I love Buddy Holly.
Yeah, I like all of his stuff, but I mean Peggy Sue's great to if you're into A, D, and E, for playing. I think I said Peggy Sue because there was a Buddy Holly documentary on the TV recently, and Paul was in that. Did an interview in that, and he actually was playing that on his guitar. But I like all of his records.
What about directing a movie?
I don't think so. Maybe if I had something that I was, I would certainly never want to direct somebody else's stuff. If I happened to somehow write a script that I thought had to be done, then I think I would get a director who I could work with, and then I'd stand by him and say, I was about doing this, that and the other, but I wouldn't take on that role myself. But I've come to realize it's not that easy to write a script. I've got a lot of great ideas and sketches in my head and jokes and tunes and things like that, but it's a different matter trying to put it all together and get a crew full of people to do it. It's not easy. It's not even easy to make a bad movie.
Nobody sets out to make a bad movie.
No, but you have to go through such a hassle and give up so much of your life. You have to be one-pointed in it, and I don't think it's that important to me to do that.
Have you written a script at all?
No. I keep thinking of sort of funny ideas, but that's not enough to go by. I think I'm better off to just write a couple of tunes and help other people who are dedicated 100% to either writing scripts like Michael Palin or people like that.
And what about the music? I mean, do you deliberately set aside a period each year to do something music-wise?
No, but I'm very fortunate to have got a 24-track studio in my house. So sometimes if it's cold out and raining and something, I just say, I'll just go in the studio. It's just a nice room to go. I've got all my guitars and stuff. And it's a nice place to go. And sometimes I just think I'll write a tune and I can turn the tape on. I've got, boxes and boxes full of songs, demos that I made. Because I got to a point where I got tired of the competition in record business. It was like, it was all to do with who had the biggest haircut or who had the greatest promotion team or which record company bought the most cocaine from the promoters. And I hate the whole business to do with, after 20 odd years of being in the record business, I'm not going to go around trying to hustle, might say, well, listen to my song, you know what I mean? So I got into the attitude, well, I'll just write my tunes and I'll make quick demos of them. I just write a tune and put it down on tape in one evening, and I'll leave these boxes of tapes like Jim Reeves. And they can dub people on him later and say, he was not a bad lad after all. But I mean, right now, or the past couple of years, I see it's changing. It's got to change now because it's become so monotonous and so predictable. The production and the sound, I mean, you just hear the first bar of a tune and you know exactly what it's going to be like, and they have all their set way of recording the bass drum and the snare drum and the all these emulators and which are wonderful instruments, but all this thing where they put about 10 keyboards all MIDI together, and it's just boring. That's why I'd rather hear Buddy Holly. And so I just got so fed up with it for a while, but now I've got to a point where I think, well, It's got to change, and anyway, I'm not going to worry about all that. I'm just going to do an album next year.
Oh, you are going to do one?
Yeah.
Oh, right.
But now also, because I got to a point where I was writing and performing and producing all my records, and it just gets too much. You get so bogged down in it, and so now I've got a couple of really good people who are great producers who I'm looking forward to working with.
What a delightful and humble man. Very sadly, George Harrison died from lung and brain cancer at the age of just 58 in November 2001. His was an incredible career in movies, music and television, including becoming a member of the supergroup The Travelling Wilburys, as well as providing his voice and character to episodes of The Simpsons.